How's it going, Chasers? I hope you're having a kick-ass week. This is Matt. That's his kick-ass brewery setup in the background. Today we're actually making beer, but the reason we're doing that is to give you a overview, a introduction into all grain brewing. Welcome to Distill, everyone. This is the channel all about chasing the craft of home distillation and making it a legitimate hobby. Even though we're talking about beer, the process up until you switch over and start boiling and adding hops and so on and so forth is exactly the same though. And the reason I want to do this is because this guy knows all about brewing.
Sure.
Today, Matt?
Imperial Stout.
An Imperial Stout, which, for those of us that aren't initiated, is...
just a big, boozy, dark, beautiful thing.
Basically 2 stouts added together?
Yeah.
Almost?
Yeah, roughly 10%.
It's like double the stout.
Yeah, 2 times stout.
Alright, Matt, so what is the first thing we need to do today?
Prepare our strike water.
Our strike water, which is...
basically the water we got for our grain.
Okay, so it's hot water that's going into the grain at the beginning. Let's have a look.
Sure.
Alright dude, so what are you doing now?
I'm just figuring out how much water I need.
And why does that matter?
Just to hit the right ratio of water to grain.
And what is that ratio? What do you want?
I'm aiming for about 2.5 litres per kilo of grain at the moment. A bit short on mash tun space, so getting it thick. Oh, this is the mash tun, this is where the magic happens.
So what is a mash tun?
Basically where all our infusion happens. They're breaking down of the starches into simpler sugars so the yeast can eat it.
Awesome. So you've got a whole lot of dials and watsits up here. What do you have going right now? What have you set?
I don't even know what these do. They just, at the moment I've just got my magnetic pump going, so that's recirculating out the bottom through this, which is our heat exchanger, back up through a sight glass, which is temperature checked, and back in.
So there is going to be a bunch of you out there right now that just freaks the out because that is a whole lot of equipment right now. Matt has taken things kind of to the next level with his kit, and we are going to be putting out another video really close to this one, so I'll link it when it happens, talking about different types of equipment and different ways that you can do exactly the same process, right Matt?
Yep.
And at the end of the day, the fancy equipment, does it make better beer?
No.
So this thing here, this is the mash tun, and this is where we're going to mix the grain and the water together to let the magic happen. We'll talk about that a little bit later on, but the only important thing to know right now is that we've got the strike water ready. And essentially what that means is we've got the right volume of water and the right temperature of water to add into the grain later on. And yes, the temperature is important. The strike water temperature is important because we want to hit a very specific temperature, which is called a mash temperature, when we add everything in together. Alright dude, so what temperature do you have your strike water set to?
69.
69 degrees Celsius?
Magic number, 69 Celsius.
Which is this here. But that is not the temperature that you want to mash at.
No. Want to mash it roughly 64 degrees, but I'm going to lose a bit of heat.
So what you're saying is the thermal mass of the grain is going to pull the temperature of your overall mixture down.
Yep.
You want to hit 64 degrees to mash at, which means the strike water has to be hotter than the grain.
Correct.
How do you work that out?
Math.
Maths.
Yes, math.
Yeah, so the thing is it's actually kind of complicated, right? There's a lot of things that go into it. There's no golden rule we can tell you based on your equipment, the size that you're doing, the amount of grain, temperature of the water, temperature of the grain.
Ambient temperatures, everything.
All sorts of different things. There's software that will help you.
Beersmith.
Beersmith is great, not cheap. I'll link a couple of free and cheaper options for you too. So that's got a little bit of time to heat up. What are we going to do while we wait?
Crush our grains.
Alright.
This is roughly what grain looks like uncrushed. Need to crush it so the moisture can get to the inside, the good bits really.
So while Matt's measuring and weighing and starting to crush, basically the idea is that the grain is like a whole kernel or a seed, I guess, technically. I'm not entirely sure what it is. But the problem is that the water can't get into the inside of it and pull all the starch out, put the starch into solution if the water can't see or touch the starch. So we crush it to open it all up and allow the water access to the starch on the inside. So just really quickly, I want to say a huge thank you to Gladfield for supplying the grain for this video. Thanks guys, I totally appreciate it. I may have screwed up though and forgot to bring the light chocolate malt. So Matt is on the phone right now trying to work through the homebrewing network to see if he can track down a little bit of light chocolate.
Can I borrow it?
How'd you do, Matt?
We got it.
Awesome.
We're good.
Ready to mash in, Matt. What are you doing now?
Just getting my water chemistry right for the water. Basically it's stripped right back to row water to begin with, so I build it up with what we want in there.
Let me decipher that for you just a little bit. What Matt is saying is that he strips his water all the way back to pretty much just pure water with a reverse osmosis system. Then he builds the water back up to what he wants using minerals and salts. This kind of an advanced thing and something you don't really have to worry about until I would say you've got everything else in the process kind of nailed. But once you've got everything else nailed, it takes it to that next level to dial it up to the next level of awesome. We're not going to go into this too much in this video because it is kind of complicated, but just know that it's there if you want to geek out on it. So the grain is crushed, we're ready to mash in. What is this thing in front of us?
The mash tun.
This is a mash tun, and this is
our strike water.
With our strike water in it, which is at 69 degrees.
Yep.
We're going to add all of the grain in, and we're going to aim for 64 degrees once we've mashed it.
Yep.
Tips or hints on what we do at this stage?
Basically just keeping it stirring. Don't just dump it all in or you'll get what they call dough balls.
So it's a whole lot of grain that sticks together, that gets wet on the outside, but on the inside of the dough ball,
Dry.
completely dry. We don't want that.
Sweet.
That's all good. Matt is just turning on the Herms system. This is another one of those things that's kind of on the advanced side and totally not necessary to make good beer. But what he's doing is he's recirculating the wort through the mash tun into a Herms system which directly controls the temperature to try and stabilize the temperature of the mash in the mash tun to exactly 64 degrees for the whole time. Once again, if you don't have the stuff, that's fine. There's plenty of people that mash in just in an esky or in a pot. They insulate it and they leave it, and the temperature will change. It's not a big deal. So we're all mashed in, the Herms system's operating. Did we hit the temperature we wanted?
Yeah, we're slightly over, but not an issue.
Okay, cool, and that'll drop pretty quickly too.
Drop as it recirculates, yeah.
Not a problem. Now why are we aiming for a certain temperature in the mash?
We're targeting different enzymes basically for...
Okay, right.
Yeah, to put it simply, it affects the body and how dry the beer is. Whether you're aiming for a thicker body with a more sweet finish to a drier finish with a more thin body.
Okay, right. So there's alpha amylase and beta amylase inherent in the malted barley, and they're more or less active depending on the temperature that they're in.
There's a crossover, so alpha is between 65 and 70-ish. Those are pretty rough.
Yeah, so they cross over right around the 65.
Yeah.
So as we go lower in temperature, what happens?
The enzyme will break down the sugar chains into more simpler, more digestible sugars.
So more digestible sugars mean the yeast can ferment more of it out, which means a drier beer and a higher alcohol percentage. And then the higher we take the mash temperature, the inverse is true. So it's a chewier beer and a higher alcohol as well.
Yeah, no, higher alcohol.
Oh, sorry, lower alcohol. Lower alcohol, Malpit. So this is the point where brewing and distilling diverge a little. With beer, what are you aiming for?
Yeah, so we want some residual sugar left in the beer for drinkability, really. You don't just want a dry, bitter beer.
Right, so you want to keep some body, you want to keep some flavour, but for us distillers, we more than likely, most of the time, want to ferment down quite dry, which would mean, how would we go about changing that for distillers?
Mashing low.
Lower mash temp.
Additional enzymes maybe, I think you use, maybe?
Some people do, for sure. I generally mash in at about 62 degrees Celsius for distilling, just so you know, guys. So we've been mashing for a little over an hour. It's a big beer, so Matt decided to let the mash go for a little bit longer than normal. Normally about 60 minutes. That's cool. Now this is the point in the process where, depending on what you're doing, if you're distilling, you may do things a little differently than what we're going to do. What we're going to do is transfer it into the boil kettle and boil it for at least an hour and add hops to it to turn it into beer. If you're distilling, on the other hand, you may want to not boil at all and throw it straight into the fermenter, cool it down, and get ready to pitch your yeast. There's pros and cons to this. There's a whole thing that we can talk about. That's an entirely other video, which I need to make sometime soon. But for us, right now, right here, we're making a stout, which means we definitely are going to boil, we definitely are going to add hops. So we need to get the wort out of the mash tun, separate it from the grain, and get it into the brew kettle. Alright, so the mash is all done now. Matt, what do we need to do now?
Ready to transfer to the kettle.
So we need to take the wort out of here and put it into here.
Yes.
But we're also going to sparge. What does that mean?
Sparging is essentially rinsing. So we're just going to take water from here at the same time as this is draining and topping it over the top. So you're essentially rinsing the grains, get all of the sugars that stuck to them just sitting in there.
As the wort drains out of the grain, the sugar syrup is still stuck to the grain. Think of the grain like a sponge. It's going to soak up some of that wort still. Putting more water in on the top, just plain hot water, rinses through the grain and essentially washes the rest of that sugar and flavour out of the grain through into the brew kettle as well. So the wort is transferring into the kettle now. We've got the sparge water coming in, which is coming from the HLT over there. And essentially we're trying to match the flow rate coming in from the HLT, the sparge water coming out, and the transfer going across that way. So hopefully the level won't change too much in here.
So now we're about halfway through, I think. As it first started transferring, our first runnings were about 1.096, I think. And we've just taken a reading at 32 litres in here, and it's 1.072, so it's dropped 20 points. Usually for a light beer, where I was aiming for, 5% beer roughly, I'd be letting it drop down to, I'd either be sparging to volume, so I'd be aiming to hit my volume I'm expecting in my kettle, or stopping it when the gravity drops a certain level. So 1.010 is the magic number for not wanting to drop below there really. It's any lower and you can start extracting tannins, which can lead to a more over astringent beer, which decreases drinkability, makes it a bit harsh. Yeah, so that's a good rule of thumb, not to sparge any lower than 1010. And obviously you don't really want to go that low for too long anyway, as it's dropping your gravity down. You're pretty much just extracting water from then. We're ready to fire up the kettle now, so yeah. Swing on! Done.
So heat up time on Matt's system is about 20-25 minutes. Now, if we were going to distill this and all you wanted to do was sanitize it, 15 minutes once you hit a rolling boil, that's going to do the trick. But because we're making beer, we're doing at least a 60-minute boil. What do you got there, Matt?
Hops.
Hops.
Hops. This is what hops look like if you care. These are hop pellets, so yeah.
So you're going to throw those in now, right?
Yeah.
How much are you putting in?
100 grams.
100 grams of Pacific Jade hops, and this is going in at 60 minutes to go still on the boil.
Yep.
So what does that mean for the flavour? What's that going to do?
It's pretty much going to be 100% for the bittering of the beer, so it'll all of the aromatic and flavours will get just boiled off over that amount of time. Generally, if you want to add hops to impart flavour, it'll be in the last 10-15 minutes. And for aroma, you want it basically right at the end.
or even dry hopped.
Yeah.
When there's no heat at all.
So now I've just set my timer for another 60 minutes, so we'll let that track along and we'll chuck it into the fermenter. This is my immersion chiller. This is basically how we cool the wort after it's been boiled. We just hook a standard garden hose, water goes in, water goes out, cools it down.
Putting it in now before you actually want to cool it down, why is that?
I chuck it in the last 10 minutes of the boil, that sanitises it basically. From now on we try and tighten up sanitation. We're getting closer to everything up until now gets boiled.
So basically anything that was in there up until now has had the crap boiled out of it. So it's sanitary.
Yeah.
But from here on in, we're getting to the point where it's not going to boil long enough to kill anything that's introduced into it. So because we're doing beer, and it's going to go into bottles or kegs or whatever for a long time, you need to make sure that there's nothing in there that can grow, right?
Yeah.
So we're throwing it in now. Anything that's on this thing is going to die, but we need to be careful from here on in to make sure it's sanitary. Before we see that, I need to thank the Patreons a whole lot. Thank you guys. Thank you so much. Like everyone knows, if you've been watching these videos, these things don't happen without the Patreons. The Patreons are the ones that keep the lights on, and I 100% appreciate it. If you do want to check Patreon out, find out what it's all about, see if it's right for you, you can go to this link here. If it's not, don't tell me you're sorry. I'm sick of people telling me you're sorry that you're not doing Patreon. It's cool. I expect nothing. Now you're thinking like a YouTuber.
This is some yeast nutrient. Basically this is probably just old dead yeast, so it's just got a bit of extra shit that it's just basically got a bunch of extra stuff that the yeast needs to thrive. So we're down to temp now. We're going to transfer from the kettle into our fermenter. Basically I'm at 33 degrees roughly. The pitch temperature I'm aiming for is about 18 degrees, but I've got a glycol chiller, so once I've got it in here I cool it down even more before pitching my yeast. So glycol chiller in here is an immersion chiller inside this. It's just another thing you don't have to have, but it makes things easier because otherwise I'd have to cool it down for another down to pitching, you know, about 20 degrees.
So if you don't have the glycol chiller, which let's face it, most people will not. So you do want to get, for beer, you definitely want to get down below 20 degrees to pitch, ideally. Some people will pitch hot and then cool the wort afterwards. Not ideal. Some people will put it into the fermenter and then cool it before they pitch. Not really ideal either, but these are the things you have to do if you don't have a glycol chiller.
So we're all done. We've got the beer, the wort is into here and into there. So you don't know this, but we brewed 2 beers today. Got our glycol chiller down there. All we need to do is add our yeast once it's at the correct pitching temp. Which right here is our yeast starter. So yeah.
So this is a pretty big volume beer and a pretty big starting gravity beer. So what have you done there? What's that in your hand?
So this is an attempt to bump up, basically saving me pitching 20 packets of yeast. This is pitching 5 packets of yeast, and I've made a mini beer, you could say, called a yeast starter. It's roughly 4 litres. Pitch them, it grows the cell counts up of the yeast. Then I've decanted it, added more fresh wort or more, basically made another beer. Just keep doing it and you're stepping up your yeast cell counts to get to optimal pitching rates.
So once again, this is kind of an advanced sort of technique, but one of the biggest problems Matt's been telling me in homemade beer is underpitched. Not enough yeast, stresses the yeast out, does all sorts of crazy things. So creating starters is a great way to not spend literally hundreds of dollars on yeast, right? And there's like a single piece of equipment that makes this a whole lot easier. Well, actually a couple, right? You have one of these conical flasks, a stir plate, and a little magnetic stirrer that goes inside the flask. Yep.
Basically that basically stirs and aerates the conical flask without manually jamming a spoon in there and mixing it all up. Basically promotes cell growth. Now that we're all finished, I'm going to let this ferment for 1 to 2 weeks. It's quite a high gravity beer, so it could take a little bit longer. Raising the temperature as we go, which helps manage off flavours. And once fermentation's finished, I'll crash cool it, which drops a lot of bits out of suspension, and then I'm going to keg it.
So what do you know, guys? Of course he kegs his beer, he doesn't bottle it, but you could bottle it. You could bottle it. Nothing wrong with that. The biggest pain in the ass about bottling is bottles. Cleaning. So many cleaning. Cleaning. I'm not even talking right because I hate cleaning so much. Kegging is one big bottle. You clean one bottle, you sanitize one bottle, you dispense out of one bottle. On the flip side, if you've got, what, 4 or 5 dozen bottles to clean, and no fun. But it is totally doable. So thanks a bunch, dude. This has been a whole lot of fun for me to kind of go back to my roots and brew. I haven't brewed a beer in like 4 years, I think. It's kind of crazy. So all in all, do you think today went well?
Yeah, I was happy with today.
A few little ups and downs. That's kind of just the way brewing goes, though.
Yeah,
I think, right?
Always little niggles.
Yeah. Anyway, guys, I know that this is different than what we normally do on the channel, but I really wanted to do this for 2 reasons. An excuse to get out from in front of the camera, get behind the camera, and really kind of give you guys some more in-depth stuff in a much quicker time for me. And 2, I think going back to brewing to look at all grain mashing, I think distillers can learn a whole lot from brewers. I really do. So this has been a pleasure, man. I appreciate it. Thank you, dude.
Cheers.
And if you want to see more of what Matt's doing, which I thoroughly recommend you should do, you should go to
DG Brewing Co. on Instagram.
You should do that. There'll be a link down below. Check him out. This guy's got like 100 followers right now. He should 100% have like 10,000. So make it happen, guys. Thanks a bunch, team. I hope you enjoyed this one. I hope that you enjoyed stepping a little bit out of our wheelhouse, doing something a little bit different. I hope you enjoyed stepping out of our wheelhouse a little bit, doing something a little bit different that offers us a really good learning opportunity. Anyway, team, I've had a blast. I hope you have as well. Hit the thumbs up down below. Hit subscribe if you haven't yet. And I'll catch you next time, guys. Keep on chasing the craft. See ya.